Hello.
When Mrs. Taylor asked me to house sit while they went on their annual cabin trip, I didn't hesitate for a second. I'd known the family for years. Her son Matt had been my best friend since middle school. We played baseball together, crashed at each other's houses on weekends, and had the kind of friendship where words weren't always necessary. So when she called me 2 weeks before their trip and asked, "Would you be willing to look after the house for a few days?" I said yes before she could even finish the sentence. Felt like a big deal. I was 18, freshly graduated, and while I'd done things like babysitting or pet sitting before, this was different. This was staying in someone's home, alone. Their house wasn't huge, but it had this warmth to it. Plants in every room, bookshelves with real books, not just decorative ones, and the faint, clean scent of lavender everywhere. It was the kind of house that felt lived in but not messy. Every picture on the wall meant something. Mrs. Taylor gave me a quick tour the day before they left. She was dressed in her usual effortless way. Fitted jeans, a loose white shirt, and her hair pulled into a low bun. She was only in her early 40s, but something about her always made people straighten their posture when she walked into a room. Not because she was intimidating, just composed, calm. The kind of woman who made everything look easy. "You don't have to do much," she told me as we walked through the kitchen. "Just water the plants every other day, bring in the mail, and keep the doors locked. The fridge is full, and you're welcome to anything. Oh, and there's wine. But don't you dare touch it unless you're over 21, she added with a mock-serious glance. I laughed. Got it. No wine. Plants, mail, and doors. She smiled and patted my shoulder. Thank you, really. It gives me peace of mind. Matt didn't say much as they left the next morning. He was more excited about finally getting out of town. I stood on the porch and waved as their car pulled out of the driveway, the sun just beginning to warm the quiet neighborhood. It felt strange, watching them disappear like that, like I'd been handed the keys to a world I wasn't supposed to fully enter. The first night was uneventful. I watched TV, ate leftovers she had labeled for me, and sat outside for a while just listening to the wind in the trees. The neighborhood was almost too quiet compared to my place. No dogs barking, no music, just stillness. By the second day, I had slipped into a rhythm. Wake up, make coffee in their perfectly organized kitchen, water the plants, skim through the mail, go for a walk, then return to binge shows on their enormous living room TV. I'd forgotten how different their house was from mine. Everything felt soft. Warm lights, earthy colors, cozy blankets in every room. I found myself walking slower, speaking quieter, even though no one was around. One evening, I wandered into the study, a room I didn't remember being in before. The door had always been slightly closed, and out of habit, I never thought to explore it. But I was curious. Inside were tall bookshelves filled with novels and photography albums. A large oak desk sat in front of a window, and behind it was a wall covered in framed black and white photos. Places I didn't recognize, but somehow felt familiar. On the desk, a small wooden box caught my eye. It wasn't locked, and when I opened it, I found a collection of handwritten notes. Not mine to read, but I glanced at one anyway. A card from Matt when he was maybe 10. "You're the best mom ever," it read in crooked letters. My stomach twisted in a way I didn't expect. There was something intimate about it all. This quiet space filled with fragments of someone's life. That night, I sat on the couch and stared at the ceiling, thinking about Mrs. Taylor more than I should have. She had always been in the background of my life, a friendly figure who offered snacks and asked about grades. But lately, I'd started to notice things differently. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was focused. How her voice had a softness to it, even when she was frustrated. How she always smelled faintly of jasmine and coffee. It wasn't that I had a crush on her exactly. I just respected her in a way that felt personal. She carried something quiet with her. Something I couldn't name but felt pulled toward. 3 nights in, I stayed up late, scrolling through my phone on the couch. A thunderstorm rolled in, and the occasional flash of lightning lit the walls in brief jolts. I loved nights like this. They made me feel small but safe. Wrapped in a blanket, I eventually dozed off to the sound of rain tapping on the windows. Then I heard it. A door. Not the front, one of the inside ones. The sharp, unmistakable sound of it clicking shut. I sat up fast, my heart leaping. Maybe the wind? No. Footsteps followed. Light ones, coming from the hallway. I stood, slowly, and peeked around the corner. A figure was in the dim light of the hallway, hair damp, keys still in hand. Mrs. Taylor. She was back. She stopped when she saw me. Her eyes widened slightly, and she gave a breathless smile. "I didn't think you'd still be here." I blinked. "You're early." "Yeah." She looked down at her bag, then back up at me. Plans changed. I needed to come back for something important. For a second, neither of us moved. The storm outside rumbled in the background, thunder rolling low and steady like a distant warning. Mrs. Taylor stood near the front door, her hand still resting on the knob, as if unsure whether to fully step inside. Water droplets clung to her hair and soaked the shoulders of her navy jacket. She looked tired, but not in the worn-out, exhausted way. It was more emotional, like she'd been carrying something invisible. "I didn't mean to scare you," she said quietly, slipping her shoes off near the mat. I shook my head. "No, it's okay. I just didn't expect anyone." She smiled faintly. "Me neither." She moved past me toward the hallway, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. I couldn't help but notice how the soft hallway light played against her damp collarbone. I quickly looked away, suddenly aware of the weight in the air between us. "I hope everything's all right," I said, unsure if I was allowed to ask. She paused near the kitchen. "Yeah, I just needed a night to myself." I followed slowly, careful not to intrude. "Do you want me to go?" Mrs. Taylor glanced back over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. "No, no, that's okay. You're doing me a favor. Stay. Please." That word, please, hung in the air longer than it should have. She disappeared into her bedroom without another word, and I stood awkwardly in the hallway before returning to the living room. The room felt different now. The space that had been mine for the past few days suddenly wasn't. I turned off the TV and sat quietly, listening to the muffled sounds of her moving around. Maybe 10 minutes passed before I heard her voice again. "Would you like some tea?" I turned toward the kitchen. She was there, barefoot now, her hair pulled into a low, messy ponytail. She changed into a soft gray sweater and leggings, the kind of outfit people only wore when they were at home, when their guard was down. "Sure," I said, getting up slowly. We sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, steam rising between us. She wrapped both hands around her mug like she was trying to warm something inside herself. I didn't know what to say. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly, just unfamiliar. "Thank you," she said finally. "For what?" "For being here, for taking care of the house. I know it's just a favor, but still, it means something." I nodded, unsure how to respond. "You're welcome. It's been peaceful." She looked around the kitchen. It usually is. Too peaceful sometimes. There was something in the way she said that, something laced with loneliness. I saw it then clearer than I had before. The quiet sadness behind her eyes. The kind that doesn't come from one bad day but from years of small disappointments that never had names. "Are you okay?" I asked before I could stop myself. She gave a soft smile. "You're very observant." "Sorry. That was probably too personal." "No," she said. "It's just rare for someone to ask." Another silence. She took a sip, set her mug down gently, and looked at me across the table. "Sometimes I forget how fast time goes," she said. "One moment Matt was in middle school and the next he's grown, gone. And here you are, sitting in my kitchen, like it's all completely normal." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded again. "You've changed, you know," she continued. "You're not the same kid who used to run through this house eating all my granola bars." I laughed, relieved by the levity. "Those granola bars were always too good." She smiled, then leaned back in her chair. "And now you're here, taller than me, drinking tea like an adult." "I don't know if I'd call myself an adult yet," I said, "but I'm trying." "You're doing better than most." For a moment, the air shifted. Something in her gaze lingered longer than it should have. She looked at me like she was seeing me. Not as Matt's friend, not as a kid who used to sleep on their couch, but as someone else entirely. Someone she didn't expect to notice this way. I broke the moment first, glancing at my cup. "I should probably head to bed." She nodded, her voice a little quieter now. "Of course. Good night." As I stood to leave, I heard her voice again. "Your room's still made up." I didn't touch anything. I paused in the doorway. "Thanks." I walked down the hall to the guest room, suddenly hyper-aware of the silence again. My thoughts were racing. What was that? A friendly talk? A motherly chat laced with nostalgia? Or something more? I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the empty mug. The storm had passed, but its energy remained. And then, just as I was about to lie down, I heard the faint sound of footsteps. Soft, barefoot, coming down the hall. They stopped just outside my door. I held my breath. There was a pause, just a few seconds, but it felt like an hour. I could feel her presence through the thin layer of wood, as if she were deciding something in that moment. A battle in her head. Then, quietly, the footsteps retreated, and I was left with nothing but silence, the echo of her steps still bouncing around in my chest. I barely slept that night, even though nothing happened, no door opened, no words were spoken. The quiet weight of her presence outside my door left a mark. My mind replayed every glance, every pause, every tone in her voice from earlier. Had I imagined it? Maybe I was reading too much into it. Or maybe something really was changing. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds. Birds were chirping outside, and the air in the room was warm, still, like the house was waiting for something. I dragged myself out of bed, half expecting the house to be empty again. But as I stepped into the hallway, I heard the clinking of dishes and the soft hum of music coming from the kitchen. Mrs. Taylor was already up. She was wearing a light blue robe tied loosely at the waist, her hair damp again, probably from a shower. She looked different in the daylight, less guarded, almost casual, like this was normal, like it had always been this way. "Morning," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. She turned around from the counter, holding a mug in both hands. "Morning. I hope I didn't wake you." "No. I didn't sleep much anyway," She gave me a knowing glance but didn't ask why. I made coffee. Want some? Sure, I said, stepping into the kitchen. She poured me a cup and slid it across the counter. Our fingers almost touched, and that tiny moment felt louder than it should have. I sat at the table again, and she leaned against the counter, sipping slowly. The silence between us was thicker now, not uncomfortable, just full. I meant to leave again this morning, she said, her eyes on the window. But I didn't feel like driving. I nodded. Plans change. They do. She finally looked at me, and there it was again, that expression that seemed to ask a question without words. I was thinking of cleaning up the garden, she said suddenly. The rain made a mess of everything. Want to help? I shrugged. Sure. Why not? We spent the next 2 hours outside, barefoot in the grass, pulling weeds and clearing leaves from the walkway. She wore gardening gloves and kept brushing strands of hair from her face. I tried to keep it casual, but every time she leaned forward or laughed at something I said, I felt that same quiet electricity building. At one point, I reached to grab a small rake from the porch, and when I turned back, she was kneeling in the flower bed, her hands buried in the soil. She looked up at me and smiled, sunlight catching her cheeks, her collarbone visible beneath the robe she still hadn't bothered to change out of. Something about that moment made the air feel thinner. Thanks for helping, she said softly. Of course. She stood and brushed dirt from her knees. Let's get something to drink. Inside, we washed our hands at the kitchen sink, side by side. I could feel the warmth of her arm next to mine, and when I glanced at her, she was already looking at me. Not with surprise, not with curiosity, with a kind of quiet acceptance. She stepped aside and dried her hands. I did the same, trying not to make the moment weirder than it already was. But then she said something I didn't expect. You really have grown up, haven't you? I turned to her, unsure how to respond. I remember when you were just this shy kid with scuffed up sneakers and bad posture, she continued. Now look at you. I let out a nervous laugh. Still have bad posture. She smiled, but there was something else behind it. A pause. Then she stepped a little closer. You've changed, she said again, her voice quieter, but not in a bad way. We stood there in the soft light of the kitchen, not speaking, the air practically humming between us. Her eyes flicked to mine, then dropped briefly to my mouth before returning. I didn't move, couldn't, and just like the night before, the moment broke before anything happened. She turned and walked toward the hallway. I'm going to change out of this mess. You can relax if you want. Or shower. There are towels in the hall closet. I stood there, pulse still racing, heart knocking against my ribs. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. She stayed in her room for a while, and I sat in the living room trying to distract myself with a show I didn't care about. My thoughts were everywhere, playing through memories, possibilities, what-if scenarios. I kept asking myself, what am I doing? Eventually, I got up, found a clean towel, and took a long, cold shower. I thought it would clear my head. Didn't. That evening, the house took on a new kind of stillness. She made pasta and offered me a plate like it was any other normal dinner. We sat at the table again, facing each other with flickering candlelight casting soft shadows on the walls. After we ate, I helped with dishes. She handed me a towel and we dried everything side by side, our elbows bumping occasionally, neither of us saying much. But every silence felt like it was filled with the words we weren't saying. When the last dish was done, I started to turn away, but her voice stopped me. Can I ask you something? she said. I turned back. Of course. She looked at me for a moment, longer than I expected. Do you ever wonder what makes something wrong? I blinked. What do you mean? I mean, is something wrong just because people say it is? Or because we're told to believe it is? I didn't answer right away. She took a breath. Forget it. That was a dumb question. No, I said quickly. It's not. She nodded slowly, then took a step back and said, I think I'll get some sleep. Yeah, me too. I turned to go, but before I reached the hallway, I glanced back. She was still standing there, watching me. That night, the house didn't feel like the same place I had been watching for the past few days. The walls seemed closer, the hallways darker, every creak in the floor louder. I lay in bed for over an hour, staring at the ceiling, unable to quiet the thoughts in my head. Her question echoed. Is something wrong just because people say it is? Was that her way of admitting something, or asking permission for what was already happening? The night dragged on. Just when I thought sleep might finally come, I heard its soft footsteps in the hallway again. Slow, deliberate. This time they didn't stop outside my door. They continued past my room, toward the kitchen. I waited a beat, then quietly swung my legs over the bed and crept out into the hallway. The light above the stove was on. Mrs. Taylor stood there in a white tank top and loose pajama pants, pouring water into a glass. She looked over her shoulder as I stepped in. Couldn't sleep either? She asked, voice low. I shook my head. No, not really. She took a sip, then leaned against the counter, holding the glass in both hands. I used to sleep through anything, she said. Storms, trains, even Matt's music. But now, the quiet keeps me awake. I stayed near the doorway, unsure of how close to stand. She set the glass down and looked at me again. Her expression was softer this time, tired but open. She gestured toward the stools at the island. Sit, she said, unless you're planning to run away. I smiled lightly and took a seat. She sat opposite me, resting her chin on her hand. I'm sorry if I made things weird, she said after a long pause. You didn't, I said honestly. I just don't know what to do with all of this. She nodded slowly. Me neither. The silence stretched between us, but neither of us looked away. Do you remember that summer when you broke the sprinkler in our yard? She asked suddenly. I blinked, surprised by the shift. Yeah, Matt dared me to stand on it. I slipped and snapped the head off. She laughed quietly. You came to me, soaking wet and terrified, holding it like a broken toy. You didn't even yell. I wanted to, she admitted. But you looked like you were already punishing yourself more than I ever could. I smiled at the memory, then looked at her. You were always kind to me, even when I didn't deserve it. She tilted her head slightly. Maybe that's why you grew up so well. I looked down, trying to hide the warmth rising in my chest. You remind me of someone, she said. Who? Me. A long time ago. I wasn't sure what she meant, but I felt the truth in her voice. Then she stood up, walked slowly to my side of the island, and leaned against the counter just a few feet from me. You're not a kid anymore, she said. I don't know when that happened, but I see it now. I didn't move, couldn't. Her presence was overwhelming, not because of how she looked, but because of how she looked at me. She reached up and gently touched my hair, brushing it away from my forehead. It was the lightest touch, but it felt like fire. You should go to bed, she whispered. I swallowed hard. Yeah, But I didn't move. Neither did she. For a moment, it felt like the world had gone quiet. Then she stepped back and turned away. Good night. I watched her disappear down the hallway, her silhouette fading into the shadows. I sat there for a while, staring at the glass of water she left behind. My hands were shaking, my thoughts tangled. I wasn't sure what this was anymore. But I knew one thing. Something had changed, and there was no going back. The next morning I woke late. Sunlight flooded the guest room, and for a second, everything felt normal again. Like I was just house-sitting. Like I hadn't stood in the kitchen last night feeling the edge of something I couldn't define. I walked into the living room and found a note on the coffee table in her handwriting. Ran out to the store. Be back soon, L. Simple, casual, but it still sent a flutter through my chest. She hadn't left. Not really. I made coffee, sat on the porch for a while, trying to clear my head. I thought about calling Matt, about asking when they were coming back. But I didn't. I wasn't ready to explain anything. When she returned, she carried a brown paper bag with 2 takeout containers. Lunch, she said with a half smile. We sat outside on the porch steps, eating quietly. The summer air was thick, buzzing with cicadas, and everything felt suspended in time. She handed me a container of pasta and opened her own. I used to love eating on the porch when Matt was little, she said. He'd complain about bugs, but I didn't care. Still bugs, I said, swatting at one lazily. She smiled. Some things never change. After we finished, she leaned back on her hands, tilting her head to the sky. What happens when this week is over? She asked suddenly. I turned to her. What do you mean? When my husband comes home. When Matt's back. When you leave. I hesitated. I don't know. I'm not asking you to decide anything, she said. I don't want you to think I do this with anyone. I don't, I said quickly. I never thought that. She nodded almost to herself. You're kind, she said. Kind in a way I didn't expect. And maybe I needed that more than I realized. Then she stood, brushing her hands off on her jeans. I'm going to shower. As she disappeared into the house, I sat there alone on the porch, her words still spinning in my head. Maybe I wasn't the only one who had been feeling lost. The shower ran for a long time. I could hear the water through the thin walls as I sat in the living room, still holding the empty lunch container. A breeze drifted in through the open window, brushing over my skin, but I didn't feel it. My thoughts were loud, too loud. Was I imagining it all? Or had she really been reaching for something last night, this morning, just now? When the water finally stopped, the silence returned, heavy and expectant. I stayed where I was, staring at the edge of the rug like it held answers. Then she appeared. Mrs. Taylor walked in slowly, barefoot, towel draped over her shoulder, her damp hair falling naturally around her face. She wore a soft blue robe tied loosely at the waist. There was nothing calculated in her appearance. It felt like the truest version of her. I forgot to ask, she said. Did you sleep okay? I nodded. Eventually. She looked at me for a moment, then sat down on the armrest of the couch, just beside me. Her knee brushed my shoulder. We were close again, closer than we should have been, but neither of us backed away. Are you okay? I asked her. She gave a small smile. That's the second time you've asked me that this week. I guess I care. She looked down at me, eyes warm, searching. I know. There was another long pause. Then, very quietly, she said, I think I needed you to. I stood up, not abruptly, just naturally. Like something in me had decided it couldn't just sit there anymore. She stayed seated, watching me, waiting. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course. If I weren't Matt's friend, if I were just a guy, sitting here, someone you didn't know through your son, what would this be?" She exhaled slowly, her gaze unwavering. "It would still be this. But you'd let it happen?" She stood up too now, facing me. The space between us was small. Her robe barely moved as she breathed. "I don't know what this is yet," she said. "But I know I haven't felt like myself in a long time. Not until this week. Not until you." She reached out and gently touched the side of my face. "You've reminded me what it feels like to be noticed, to be alive." We stood there in silence, and for once, there were no questions left. Just understanding. She didn't pull me in. I didn't lean forward. But something passed between us. Unspoken, undeniable. It didn't need to go further. It already had. That night, we ate dinner together on the back porch. Nothing fancy, just leftovers and soft music playing from her phone. The stars came out early, scattered across the sky like quiet witnesses. She told me about her college years, how she wanted to be a photographer once, how she fell in love too fast, how dreams shifted when you got older. I listened. I didn't offer advice. I didn't need to. And when it got cold, she brought out a blanket and sat beside me. Not too close, not in a way that made it feel like anything had to happen. Just there, present. The next morning, I started packing. My time house sitting was officially over. I moved slowly, not because I was tired, but because I didn't want to leave. She helped me fold the spare sheets, laughing when I couldn't figure out how to roll the fitted one properly. When everything was by the door, we stood in the entryway, both unsure what to say. "So," I began. She smiled. "So," I looked at her. "Will things be weird?" "Only if we pretend they never mattered." I nodded. That was fair. Then she stepped forward and gave me a hug, gentle but lingering. She rested her cheek against my chest for a moment, then pulled away with a sigh. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For reminding me I'm still someone." I didn't know how to respond, so I just said the truth. "You are." I opened the door. She stayed in the hallway, arms crossed, leaning against the wall. "Tell Matt I said hi," I joked. She smiled. "I will. Eventually." I stepped out onto the porch and paused for one last look. She was still watching me, and this time her eyes weren't sad. On the walk back to my apartment, the world looked different. The streets were the same, the trees, the sky, but I wasn't. Something about that week, about her, had changed the way I saw everything. Maybe that's what happens when someone lets you in deeper than they should. Maybe that's what it means to grow up in a single breath. Either way, I didn't regret a moment of it. Some stories don't need an ending, just a beginning that lingers. And this one would stay with me for a long time.
Bye bye.